Everyone knows Mussolini was a dictator. Black shirts, raised fists, speeches from balconies. But almost nobody talks about what happened behind closed doors. The castor oil torture that left grown men in public squares covered in their own filth for days. The special tribunal that sentenced 20,000 people without appeal. The concrete cells on volcanic islands where prisoners rotted under names stripped from government records. The prosecutor who declared at Antonio Gramsci's trial, "We must stop this brain from functioning for 20 years. Which of these horrors was propaganda, and which one sits in prison ledgers and medical reports? This is about how Benito Mussolini judged communists, not judged them fairly. Judged them with methods designed to break bodies and erase names. October 1922. Mussolini becomes prime minister after the March on Rome, not through votes. Through armed black shirts terrorizing Italy's cities, while King Victor Emmanuel III refused martial law. Within days, the violence shifts. Before, fascist squads burned union halls and beat socialists in the streets. Now Mussolini controls the police. Legal state repression mixes with illegal squad violence. Communists, socialists, anarchists, anyone opposing fascism faces two threats at once. The manganello and the courthouse. If you value documented political history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. Also, this script is researched and factual, using sources from Michael Ebner's Ordinary Violence in Mussolini's Italy, published by Cambridge University Press in 2011, and Antonio Baracci's Spatial Analysis of the Special Tribunal Arrests, published in the Journal of Historical Geography in 2022. Sources that analyze arrest. Records from Rome's Central State Archives and the National Association of Politically Persecuted Italian Anti-Fascists. Not generic overviews, but deep archival work tracking individual prisoners through tribunal records and exile documentation. Now back to the information. The weapon everyone remembers wrong was castor oil, not just humiliation, torture that sometimes killed. Gabriele D'Annunzio invented it during the Fiume occupation in 1919. By 1921, fascist squads across Italy forced it down opponents' throats. 1 pint, 2 pints, sometimes an entire bottle. Roberto Farinacci, the fascist boss of Cremona, called it the golden nectar of nausea in 1929. He wrote his law thesis in 1919 on using castor oil against subversives. His squads were the most brutal in Italy. Here's the method. Black shirts grab a communist or socialist, tie him to a chair in a town square, force his mouth open, pour castor oil until he chokes. Sometimes they add a live toad. Sometimes they beat him with nightsticks first, focusing on the rear. The oil causes violent diarrhea within hours. Days of it, dehydration follows. If the victim was beaten badly, infected wounds from the nightsticks mix with the diarrhea. Some die from dehydration. Most survive, but carry the humiliation forever. Public defecation in front of entire towns. That's the point. Not just physical punishment, but social death. One town in Emilia saw fascists stamp out alcoholism by forcing wine cellars to display pint bottles of castor oil in their windows. Warning of what happens to drunks. Parliamentary opponents charged Mussolini's power was built on the manganello and castor oil. They weren't exaggerating. Between 1920 and 1922, this method spread like fire through northern Italy. Turin, Milan, Bologna, Florence, anywhere socialists or communists held local government. But castor oil was just the opening act. June 10th, 1924. Giacomo Matteotti, reformist socialist deputy, denounces the April elections as fraud in parliament. Widespread intimidation of opposition voters. 10 days later, he disappears. July 16th, his body recovered. Murdered by fascist thugs led by Amerigo Domini, assistant to Mussolini's press office. The Matteotti crisis nearly topples Mussolini. Press denounces him. Opposition walks out of parliament. Public suspects Mussolini ordered the hit. For months, he hangs on. By autumn, liberal supporters drift away. Fascist extremists in the provinces demand crackdown. They're threatened by normalization policies. January 3rd, 1925. Mussolini makes his famous speech to the Chamber of Deputies. Accepts political, moral, and historical responsibility for fascist rule and Matteotti's death. Promises tough crackdown on dissenters. The king makes no move. Next day, prefects throughout Italy receive orders to control all suspect political organizations. Searches begin. Arrests multiply. The constitutional era ends. November 5th, 1926. New laws tighten control. Law number 2008 reinstates the death penalty, abolished since 1890. Now it returns for attempts on the king, queen, heir apparent, or prime minister. For espionage, for armed rebellion. Law number 1848 on public safety expands police powers. Preventive detention. Confino, internal exile without trial. November 9th, emergency powers activated after Anteo Zamboni's assassination attempt on Mussolini in Bologna on October 31st. Mass arrests follow, including Antonio Gramsci. November 8th, 1926. Gramsci arrested despite parliamentary immunity. He's a founding member of the Italian Communist Party, elected deputy for Veneto in April 1924, party secretary since August 1924. Police ignore his legal protection. He's transferred from Rome through Naples and Sicily to Ustica Island. Private house confinement with other communists, including Amadeo Bordiga. January 1927, moved to Milan's San Vittore prison. Isolation, interrogation. His health already fragile. Pott's disease left him hunchbacked since childhood. May 28, 1928. Show trial begins in Rome. Special tribunal for the defense of the state. 22 Communist Party leaders face charges. The prosecutor, during arguments, declares, "For 20 years we must stop this brain from functioning. Not rehabilitation. Not reform. 20 years of silencing the most dangerous communist intellectual in Italy." June 4th, sentence delivered. 20 years, 4 months, 5 days imprisonment. Gramsci receives one of the heaviest sentences. Transferred to Turi prison near Bari, crowded conditions. He's suffering from uremic disorder that leaves him unable to walk. His teeth fall out. His digestive system fails. January 1929, given permission to write in his cell. February 8th, begins the first prison notebook. Over 11 years, he writes more than 30 notebooks and 3,000 pages. By 1933, moved to clinic at Formia. Still denied adequate medical care. 1935, moved to Quisisana Clinic in Rome. Due for release April 21st, 1937. Too ill to move. Dies April 27th at age 46. Combination of arteriosclerosis, pulmonary tuberculosis, high blood pressure, angina, gout, acute gastric disorders. The regime moved him from prison to hospital to avoid accusation that incarceration caused his death. Didn't work, but Gramsci was one name among thousands. The Special Tribunal for the Defense of the State operates from 1927 to 1943. 16 years, it processes approximately 30,000 individuals, not ordinary courts. Military tribunal. President is an army general. Prosecutor is the military attorney general. Procedure follows military penal code. 7 judges, all must be fascist party members. All swear oath to obey the orders of the Deuce without discussing them and to serve the cause of the fascist revolution with all my power, and if necessary with my blood. No law degree required. Just loyalty. From 1927 to 1937, 3,596 sentences passed. Total time, 15,300 years. Average sentence, approximately 5 years. In 1926, alone, 21,000 people put on trial. Of the approximately 30,000 processed by the Special Tribunal over its lifetime, we can track 2,400 arrested between 1925 and 1927 in detail. 93.7% men, average age 30.8 years. Life expectancy in Italy then was 54.9 years. 13.9% under 21, 1.1% over 65. They came from every region, but concentrated in the Industrial Triangle, Milan, Turin, Genoa, and the red regions of Emilia and Tuscany. Communists comprised the largest group, then socialists, then anarchists, then liberal anti-fascists. Trials were public in theory. A fascist deputy named Gray told the chamber on April 25, 1931 that the publicity of the Special Tribunal is extensive. Reality was different. Press falsification was notorious. Courts handed down sentences of 3 to 10 years routinely. April 12th and 15th, 1928, the tribunal condemned 14 defendants to 3 to 6 years for propaganda crimes. No appeal allowed. Only revision when new evidence discovered. Few lawyers would defend accused before the tribunal because it cast suspicion on their loyalty. Press attacked defense counsel, questioning their commitment to the regime. Prisoners traveled handcuffed in wagoni cellulari, attached to slow third-class trains. Travel only during day. At night, trains stopped at towns with prisons. Prisoners transferred to local jails chained together or spent night in cell carriages without food. One prisoner described being packed into the slowest trains in Italy, ironically called accelerated, a gale blowing as they crossed to the islands. Night of hell, impossible to rest, waves breaking through portholes. The death penalty statistics tell part of the story. Law reinstated November 25, 1926. Until war outbreak in 1940, 9 executions carried out, allegedly not for political offenses. Another 17 until Italy's surrender in July 1943. Compare this to almost 80,000 legal executions in Nazi Germany, including courts-martial. 31 death penalties issued by the Special Tribunal, according to one source. 42, according to another, analyzing northeastern provinces, where the tribunal was particularly cruel. 35 of those 42 in Trieste, Zadar, Rijeka provinces, but death sentences don't capture the full picture. Confino, internal exile, bypassed the judiciary entirely. Police powers expanded under November 6, 1926 public safety law. Every city's police compiled lists of regime opponents recording suspected or actual misdeeds. Lists submitted to provincial commissions. Opponents could be sent to internal exile for up to 5 years without trial. If acquitted after trial, they were still sent to exile anyway. September 1927, after acquittal by the Court of Savona for assisting flight of socialist leader Filippo Turati, 3 men, including Carlo Rosselli and Ferruccio Pari, were sent to Confino instead of released. The arrivals of men acquitted by the Special Tribunal to the islands were continuous. straight from prison to exile. The islands became torture chambers disguised as holiday destinations. Lipari in the Aeolian Islands north of Sicily. Ponza and Ventotene in the Pontine Islands southwest of Rome. Ustica off Sicily's northern coast. Tremiti Islands in the Adriatic off Puglia. Lampedusa in the Pelagi archipelago closer to Tunisia than Italy. Favignana in the Egadian Islands west of Sicily. These islands had served as punishment sites for thousands of years. Roman emperors exiled bothersome family members there. 19th century Italian kingdoms used them as penal colonies. Mussolini revived the tradition with bureaucratic efficiency. Arturo Bocchini, newly appointed head of police, set out in November 1926 to locate places for political deportees, focused on barely inhabited islands. An interesting consequence followed. Forcing socialists, anarchists, liberals, communists to live together created conditions for spread and development of opposition ideas the regime opposed. Islands became prison universities. Deportees organized educational programs spanning basic levels through highest theoretical production. Luigi Longo, communist leader and prisoner, stated Ventotene was a center for political formation of the confined and of organization for peace and freedom within the country. Let's look at Lipari specifics. The colony operated from 1926 until January 10th. 1933, when all requiring exile were relocated to neighboring Ponza. 16 women suffered confinement in Lipari for anti-fascist activities. Their names: Luigi Alberto, anarchist homemaker from Adria, sentenced January 27, 1932. Agata Bertolini, Republican peasant from Monterotondo, sentenced August 29, 1927. Maria Chiaravano, anarchist seamstress from Bologna, 5-year sentence October 11, 1927. Palmira Sicolario, a political homemaker from Rome, sentenced October 31, 1927. Lea Giacalia, teacher from Bologna, learned of her daughter's death while in police custody. After serving prison term June 6, 1929 to October 27, 1931 for communist propaganda, immediately sentenced to Confino for 5 years, November 18, 1931. Transferred to Ponza, January 5, 1933. Sentence commuted to 2-year probation thanks to amnesty July 11, 1934. 15 other women with similar stories, geographically from northern and central Italy, politically overwhelmingly communists or anarchists, 7 different occupations, 5 identified as homemakers. What united them? They each offended the state. Conditions on the islands varied but shared features. Deportees lived in wretched cottages if married, barracks if single. All interned must report to dwellings at sunset. No public places visited. Mail rigidly censored. 3 reports daily to militia required. 3 months imprisonment for being 1 minute late. Mussolini declared in December 1930 speech that 8 lire per day indispensable to laborers. That same month, allowance for confinati reduced from 10 to 5 lire daily. With 5 lire, approximately 25 cents, men maintained themselves. Another lire for wife, half lire per child. Few brought families. Alberto Giacometti, prisoner on Ventotene, described foliage overgrowing, the island's only purpose to shelter pirates. Chain of freed convicts sent with charge of cleaning bush and making stripe. Local populations sometimes showed sympathy. In Lipari, clashes with fascist militia in 1929 led to openly hostile attitude from locals toward regime. This led to decision to move Lipari colony to Ponza to avoid further possible evasions. But sympathy didn't prevent suffering. Old Mayor of Molinella, Dr. Giuseppe Massorenti, sat in shiphold with other prisoners, former citadel of Italian liberty. Now handcuffed. The waves in the darkness. The OVRA, Organization for Vigilance and Repression of Anti-Fascism, operated from 1927. Officially never appeared in government documents. Official name remains unclear. Secret police headed by Arturo Bocchini. Inspector Francesco Nudi headed OVRA initially, later replaced by Guido Leto, compiled files on approximately 130,000 potential subversives, network of approximately 100,000 informants. By 1930, organizing around 20,000 raids weekly, approximately 6,000 people arrested by OVRA, mainly communists and members of Giustizia e Libertà movement, either tried by Tribunale Speciale or sent into exile. About 4,000 arrested according to another estimate, 10 executed. Torture methods in custody went unreported officially. Reports leaked anyway. Form of beating known as St. Anthony, used in Milan. According to reports, a scorpion placed on prisoners' navel with glass over it. Other methods included sustained nightstick beatings, sleep deprivation, solitary confinement in concrete cells, starvation rations. Prisoners held months or years without charges. If acquitted, sent to Confino anyway. The law provided cover for lawlessness. Carlo Rosselli represents the exile experience, founder of Giustizia e Libertà movement in 1929, uniting liberals and moderate socialists, author of book on Mazzini and Bakunin. Arrested without hearing, interned at Ustica in summer 1927 at the moment, the Society for the History of the Risorgimento awarded him prize for his book. Later helped socialist leader Filippo Turati escape to France. Arrested again, sentenced to 10 months imprisonment. Upon completion, instead of release, sent to Confino. After escape from Lipari with Emilio Lussu and Francesco Fausto Nitti, 3 famous escapees whose photos circulated in anti-fascist press, he edited Anti-Fascist Journal from Paris. June 12th, 1937, Rosselli and his brother Nello assassinated near Bagnoles de l'Orne in France. Mussolini's agents caught up with him. The Cagolards, French fascist organization, carried out the hit on orders from Rome. Piero Gabetti, liberal anti-fascist, who wrote for opposition press, beaten by fascist squads, died February 15, 1926, at age 25, in Paris exile from injuries sustained in beatings. Giovanni Amendola, liberal politician and journalist who opposed fascism in Parliament, assaulted multiple times by blackshirts. July 20th, 1925, beaten severely in Montecatini Terme, died April 7th, 1926, in Cannes from injuries, not executed by tribunal, murdered by thugs with government protection. But we haven't touched the worst part yet. If you value this kind of documented research into authoritarianism's mechanisms, subscribe. This is how we keep producing historically accurate content drawing from tribunal records and prison documentation. Back to it. The systematic nature of repression used space as weapon. Arrests weren't random. Spatial and temporal patterning shows sophisticated system of population control. Using historical GIS analysis, researchers mapped 2,400 arrests from 1926 to 1928. Results show clustering in industrial centers in red regions as expected, but arrests spread far broader. Every region saw political arrests. Every province, small towns and rural areas alongside cities. Urban-rural differences reveal strategy. Cities saw mass arrests during specific temporal windows. Rural areas saw steady trickle. Border regions saw heightened surveillance. The Knox Index analyzing spatial and temporal proximity of arrests reveals patterns. Close in time, close in space, 2.59% of arrests. These represent coordinated sweeps. Mass roundups. Close in time, not close in space, 9.73%. National operations, hitting multiple regions simultaneously. Not close in time, close in space, 2.9%. Ongoing surveillance in specific localities. Not close in time, not close in space, 84.78%. The baseline, constant pressure everywhere, always. Arrests concentrated in provinces of Milan, Turin, Genoa, Bologna, Florence, Venice, Rome, but also significant numbers in Apulia in the south. In Trieste and northeastern borderlands. Why? Milan, Turin, Genoa form industrial triangle. Working class strongholds. Communist Party literally born in Emilia and Tuscany. Pre-Congress of Italian Communist Party held in Imola, Emilia in November 1920. Livorno Congress in January 1921, where PCI founded, saw Tuscan and Emilian delegates dominate. Northeastern provinces, Trieste, Zadar, Rijeka, recently annexed, Slovenian and Croatian minorities. Irredentist tensions. Special tribunal particularly cruel there. 35 of 42 total death penalties in Northeast. Age breakdown of arrested reveals youth movement crushed. Average age 30.8, 13.9% under 21. These aren't hardened revolutionaries. Students, young workers, people who should have futures. Occupational breakdown shows working class targeted. 58.2% from secondary economic sector, industrial workers, compared to 26.9% of general population. Only 12.7% from primary sector, farmers, agricultural workers, compared to 51.6% of general population. 29.1% tertiary occupations. The regime feared industrial workers, correctly. Women arrested at far lower rates. 6.3% of those arrested between 1925 and 1927. Cases dismissed or transferred to ordinary courts at much higher rate than men. Overall, special tribunal more lenient with women, but those whose cases remained in tribunal treated like men in sentencing and incarceration. Women and men both subjected to long surveillance periods after release. Once arrested, both might spend years in prison, exile, or under surveillance irrespective of guilt or innocence. A system designed not for justice, but for control. Surveillance after arrest or conviction operated independently of conviction. People acquitted or released still monitored for years, sometimes decades. 940 people from 2,400 arrest sample monitored after release or dismissal. Their residential addresses tracked, movements restricted, required to report regularly to police. Employment prospects destroyed, social marginalization complete. The geographic pattern of surveillance sites shows surveillance concentrated in same regions as arrests. Turin, Genoa, Florence, Bologna, Venice, Milan, Rome region, Apulia, spreading control like spiderweb across Italy. Duration of surveillance varied. Some monitored until regime collapse in 1943. That means someone arrested in 1926 could face 17 years of surveillance even if acquitted. 17 years of police reports. 17 years unable to travel freely. 17 years marked as enemy of state. The punishment extended far beyond prison walls. Total numbers remain disputed. Approximately 30,000 individuals processed by special tribunal over 16 years. 2,000 political opponents killed, according to one estimate. This includes tribunal executions, extrajudicial killings by squads, deaths from torture, deaths from prison conditions, 7,000 Italian Jews murdered during Holocaust. But that's later, mostly after September 1943 German occupation. From 1922 to 1943, under Mussolini's direct rule, around 2,000 deaths for political reasons. Small compared to Nazi Germany or Soviet Union, but each death calculated, each one sent message. Compared to modern Texas, population over half size of 1930s Italy, executing 20 to 30 people yearly, 65 executions from March on Rome to June 10, 1940, entry into World War II seems restrained. Comparison misses point. Italian fascism didn't need mass executions. Castor oil humiliation, island exile, constant surveillance, social death. These achieved control without martyrs. The Rocco Code, enacted 1930, effective July 1, 1931, added more crimes to death penalty list. Reintroduced capital punishment for some common crimes. Until war outbreak in 1940, 9 executions allegedly not for political offenses. Another 17 until surrender in July 1943. The special tribunal preferred imprisonment and exile, preferred surveillance, preferred breaking opponents through isolation and social marginalization rather than creating martyrs. When they did execute, as in Slovenian and Croatian borderlands, they did so to terrorize minorities and cement Italian control. The Italian Communist Party response to repression reveals the effectiveness. Party literally born in January 1921 at Livorno Congress. Immediately faced violent wave of repression, killing hundreds of militants. As Karl Radek wrote in March 1923, terror reached point where Italian comrades reported workers not venturing to speak aloud in trams. Communist Party passing through period of unheard of difficulties. Forced to offer sacrifice after sacrifice on altar of revolutionary class war. The only party that fought Mussolini's street forces consistently despite lack of means. Ufficio Uomini, Office for Illegal Work, headed by Bruno Forticiari, built clandestine organization across Italy starting spring 1921. But isolation hardened. By time Gramsci arrested in November 1926, party already operating underground in cells. Leaders meeting in secret, many in exile. The Italian resistance that emerged during World War II had roots in anti-fascism developing from mid-1920s. In memory of partisan fighters, especially communist and socialist inspiration, memory of Biennio Rosso and violent struggles against fascist squads from 1919 to 1922. Some leftists considered it true civil war in defense of popular classes against reactionary forces. When Italy signed armistice with allies September 3, 1943, armed resistance began. Battle in Rome Day armistice announced Regio Esercito Units, Sassari Division, Granatieri di Sardegna, Piave Division, Ariete II Division, Centauro Division, Piacenza Division, Lupi di Toscana Division, plus Carabinieri. Infantry, coastal artillery fought Germans. Many cities, including Turin, Naples, Milan, freed during anti-fascist uprisings. German intelligence officer estimated German casualties fighting partisans summer 1944. 30,000 to 35,000, including 5,000 confirmed killed. Kesselring, Germany's commander of occupation forces, offered his own figure, 20,000, 5,000 killed, 7,000 to 8,000 missing or kidnapped, including deserters. Similar number, seriously wounded. Both sources agreed partisan losses were less. By year's end, German reinforcements and Mussolini's remaining forces crushed uprising. In attempts to suppress resistance, German and Italian fascist forces, especially SS, Gestapo, paramilitary militias like Decima MAS and Black Brigades, committed war crimes, including summary executions and systematic reprisals against civilians. Total victims of anti-fascist movement and post-liberation violence remains unclear. Estimated between 12,000 and 26,000 killed, usually extrajudicial executions. Outbursts particularly violent in northern provinces. According to Ministry of Interior statistics, some 9,000 people killed there during April and May, 1945 only. Proportionally, scale of vengeance killings much greater than Belgium and significantly above France. 18 executed prominent fascists, including Mussolini, Fernando Mezzasoma, Luigi Gatti, Alessandro Pavolini, Achille Starace, displayed in Milan's Piazzale Loreto. Significant because bodies of 15 executed enemies of Mussolini's regime displayed in same square previous year. The reckoning came, but came in blood. April 27th, 1945. Mussolini's column stopped by partisan group near Lake Como. Discovered slumped in convoy vehicle. Condemned to death by Committee of National Liberation for Northern Italy. April 28th, executed along with Mistress Clara Petacci. Village of Giulino di Mezzegra. Walter Odissio, communist partisan, generally accepted as executioner. Evening of April 28th, bodies of Mussolini, Petacci, 16 other executed fascists loaded onto van, transported south to Milan. Early hours April 29th, dumped on ground in Piazzale Loreto. Crowd gathered. Bodies hung by feet from metal girder. Spat upon, beaten, urinated on. By time sent to morgue, remains unrecognizable. The man who built power on castor oil and bludgeon ended hanging upside down while Milan jeered. But the story doesn't end with Mussolini's corpse. The Ventotene Manifesto, written in 1941 by Altiero Spinelli and Ernesto Rossi, while in confino, presented views of anti-establishment. Born and developed in exile, remained theoretical basis for many claims made by federalist thinkers across Europe. The islands Mussolini used to crush opposition became birthplace of European federalism. Prisoners from opposing political backgrounds, punished for similar reasons, developed intellectual frameworks that shaped post-war Europe. Ventotene, Ponza, Lipari, these weren't just prisons. They were unwitting incubators of the ideas that would help build modern European unity. The continuity of state apparatus after 1943 raises uncomfortable questions. Failed purge of former fascists from inside courts meant transitional justice incomplete. Ideological biases and anti-communist policies of ruling classes continued. Show trials of partisans in Republican era from summer 1945 to early 50s demonstrated continuity of state. Papers of Umberto Terracini and Lelio Basso, promoters of Pro-Partisans Defense Committee, showed judiciary repression rooted in desire for continuity of bureaucratic apparatus. Power fascists and collaborationists maintained within state administration symbolic of conflict between reform and conservation, between moderate conservative and socialist communist political forces within Italian society in 1950s. Conflict translated into intimidation and repression of dissent even within formal democracy. The legacy remains contested. Was Mussolini's treatment of communists relatively mild compared to Hitler's genocide or Stalin's purges? Numbers suggest yes. Around 2,000 political killings from 1922 to 1943. 65 legal executions before war. 30,000 processed by special tribunal. Compared to millions killed in Holocaust. Millions in Gulag, 80,000 legal executions in Nazi Germany. Italian fascism appears almost restrained. But restraint misses the mechanism. Mussolini didn't need mass murder. He pioneered social death. Castor oil created public humiliation that destroyed reputations without martyrdom. Confino created exile without international outcry. Special tribunal created legal facade for political repression. Ovra created surveillance state with 100,000 informants watching 130,000 suspects. Every arrested person tracked for years, regardless of conviction. Every family member suspect, every associate vulnerable. This was control through anxiety, control through social fabric destruction, control through making opposition itself socially unacceptable. The genius, if we can call evil genius, was making Italians police themselves. When workers didn't dare speak aloud in trams in 1923, that's not state violence. That's self-censorship, born from watching neighbors disappear. When 5 liar daily allowance made bringing family to exile impossible, that's not prison. That's family separation through economic strangulation. When lawyers refuse to defend accused before a special tribunal for fear of ruining their own careers, that's not legal repression. That's professional class complicity born from rational self-interest calculation. The spatial analysis of arrests reveals this clearly. 84.78% of arrests not close in time or space to other arrests, meaning most people arrested in relative isolation, not mass roundups. Individual disappearances. Your neighbor arrested Tuesday, another disappeared Friday. No pattern visible, no coordinated resistance possible, just constant anxiety that you might be next. The clustering that did occur, 2.59% close in time and space, served to periodically demonstrate state power. Mass arrests every few months reminded everyone what could happen. Then return to baseline. Constant low-level pressure everywhere, always. Geographic spread tells same story. Every region saw arrests. Every province. Small towns and rural areas proportionally targeted as much as cities. Can't hide in countryside. Can't blend into urban crowds. State reaches everywhere. The northeastern provinces saw heightened surveillance specifically because of ethnic minorities. 35 of 42 death penalties there sent message. Resist Italian authority and die. Not just to Slovenians and Croatians, to all borderland populations. Loyalty to state, not negotiable. Women's experience reveals gendered dimension. Arrested at far lower rates. Cases dismissed more often. But when cases remained in tribunal, sentenced like men. The 16 women at Lipari, homemakers, seamstresses, teachers, office workers, represent cross-section of female anti-fascist activity. Leah Jacalia learned of daughter's death while in police custody, then spent years in prison and exile. Women paid double price. Political persecution and social taboo breaking, family separation and social stigma. Yet they organized. They taught in prison universities. They maintained networks that survived to resistance. Prison conditions broke people. Gramsci's deterioration documented in letters. Teeth falling out. Unable to walk. Digestive system failing. 11 years writing in cell. 30 notebooks. 3,000 pages. All while body collapsed. Prosecutor wanted to stop his brain for 20 years. Achieved it by destroying his body. Gramsci died April 27, 1937. Never saw his second son, Giuliano, born August 30th, 1926, in Moscow. Wife Julia Schucht remained in Soviet Union. His sister-in-law, Tatiana, provided support throughout imprisonment. Piero Sraffa supplied writing materials and acted as interlocutor with Palmiro Togliatti. Network of supporters kept him alive 11 years in prison. Regime still won. Stopped the brain by killing the body. The prosecutor's words at trial echo. And for 20 years we must stop this brain from functioning. Not we must punish this criminal. Not justice demands sentence. Stop this brain from functioning. Acknowledgement that ideas were a threat. That thinking was crime. That the greatest danger to fascism wasn't violence, but thought. Gramsci represented intellectual resistance. His notebooks on hegemony, on organic intellectuals, on war of position versus war of maneuver, these challenged fascist cultural project at root. Regime couldn't execute him. Too prominent. International outcry too great. So they did something worse. Let him write while killing him slowly. Creating illusion of intellectual freedom while ensuring nothing published. Stopping the brain by isolating it. This was Mussolini's real innovation. Not killing most opponents. Making killing unnecessary. Building system where opposition became socially impossible. Where even thinking opposition required such courage, such sacrifice, such willingness to accept social death, that most people chose silence. The 30,000 processed by special tribunal weren't all committed resistors. Many just spoke at wrong time. Associated with wrong people. Read wrong books. Lived in wrong neighborhoods. Attended wrong meetings. System cast wide net intentionally. Better to arrest 100 innocents than miss one guilty. Better to exile 1,000 moderates than let one radical organize. The result, by 1927, opposition crushed. Communist Party underground, Socialist Party fractured, liberal anti-fascists dead or exiled, trade unions destroyed, local governments replaced by fascist appointees, press controlled, universities purged, all achieved through mixture of legal and illegal violence, through castor oil in courts, through exile and execution, through surveillance and social pressure, through making daily life under fascism require constant performance of loyalty. The surveillance numbers reveal scale. 130,000 people with oviraphiles, 1 in 400 Italians, 20,000 raids weekly by 1930, 100,000 informants, 1 in 400 Italians either suspect or informer. Imagine living in a world where anyone might report you, where casual comment about government could lead to file creation, to surveillance, to raid, to arrest, to trial without appeal, to exile, to years of police reports, to permanent marking as enemy of state. That's the world Mussolini built, not through mass violence, but through meticulous bureaucracy of repression. The Tribunale Speciale served this function perfectly. Military court with legal trappings. Judges who swore loyalty to Dutch, no appeal. Public trials in theory. Secret proceedings in practice. Sentences averaging 5 years. Maximum 5-year exile terms that could repeat indefinitely. Revision only when new evidence found. Evidence controlled by regime. Catch-22 built into legal structure. Arrested, tried, convicted. Even if acquitted, sent to Confino. Released from Confino, surveillance begins. Surveillance files used to justify new arrest. Cycle repeats. Some people trapped in system for decades. The spatial spread of surveillance after arrest or release shows permanence. 940 of 2,400 arrested between 1925 and 1927 monitored after tribunal processing, tracked until regime collapse. That's 16 to 18 years for some, 16 to 18 years reporting to police, 16 to 18 years employment restricted, 16 to 18 years social contacts monitored, 16 to 18 years marked as enemy, even those acquitted. Even those who served sentences. Punishment never ended. This was key to system. Not reforming criminals. Not deterring crime. Marking enemies permanently. Making opposition identity permanent scar. The islands became symbols because they concentrated experience. Lipari, Ponza, Ventotene, Ustica, Tremiti, Pantelleria, Lampedusa. Volcanic rocks in Mediterranean and Adriatic. Some measuring only a few hundred meters across. But they held thousands. Lipari alone held enough prisoners that when moved to Ponza in January 1933, it took a fleet of ships. Conditions deteriorated throughout stay. Initial phase at Ustica, almost pleasant by comparison. Gramsci organized Marxist school. Access to books, writing, food from island. Mind tranquil. Accepted imprisonment, like prisoner of war. Then transferred to Turi. Crowded conditions. Nightstick beatings. Food deliberately insufficient. Health collapsed. Transfer to clinic came too late. Body already broken. The 3 famous escapees from Lipari, Carlo Rosselli, Emilio Lussu, Francesco Fausto Nidi, became propaganda problem for regime. July 30th, 1929, they fled by boat. Photos circulated in anti-fascist press across Europe. Embarrassment for Mussolini. Rosselli continued editing journal from Paris. Speeches, organizing, network building. Until June 12th, 1937, when assassins caught him. Message sent. Can't escape. Can flee island. Can flee Italy. Still within reach. Still marked. Still dead. Curzio Malaparte, writer and filmmaker sentenced to 5 years on Lipari, wrote for Corriere della Sera during exile. Volcanic, sulfurous atmosphere flared respiratory problems from World War I. Intervention by Galazzo Ciano, Mussolini's foreign minister and son-in-law, moved him to Ischia, then Forte dei Marmi, in Tuscany. Connections mattered. Malaparte's writings gave glimpse of life. Juxtaposition between prisoner perspective and state perspective. Alberto Giacometti's book, Ventotene, described detailed experiences. Primary sources from exile period point at this tension. Prisoners organized education, mutual support, intellectual development. State-intended isolation, punishment, social death. Unintended consequences emerged. Islands became universities. Prisoners became professors. Anti-fascist theory developed precisely where regime tried to destroy it. Ventotene Manifesto exemplifies this, written 1941. Published 1944 after liberation, argued for European federalism, United States of Europe, to prevent future wars. Federal system superseding nation-states, became founding document of European integration movement. Spinelli and Rossi wrote it in Confino, using experience of national divisions, causing fascism to argue for transnational unity, using isolation regime imposed to develop ideas that would help dismantle national authoritarianism across continent. Perfect irony. Mussolini's repression midwifed its own antithesis. The final numbers remain contested, but archival work provides clarity. Approximately 30,000 individuals processed by special tribunal, 1927 to 1943. Of these, sentences totaling 15,300 years passed from 1927 to 1937. Average 5 years, but many served longer through Confino extensions. Many monitored for decades. Total killed for political reasons, approximately 2,000. This includes 31 to 42 death penalties by special tribunal, depending on source. Dozens killed by fascist squads in extrajudicial murders. Deaths from torture and beatings. Deaths from prison conditions. Deaths in Confino from disease, malnutrition, lack of medical care. Suicides from despair. Gramsci died from prison conditions. Gobetti from beating injuries. Amendola from beating injuries. Rosselli assassinated. Each death calculated or enabled by regime. The broader impact exceeded numbers. Families destroyed. Careers ended. Social networks shattered. Cultural institutions purged. Educational system controlled. Press censored. Daily life required constant performance of loyalty. Handshakes banned. Foreign words replaced. Walls covered with slogans. Mussolini is always right. Better to live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep. Forced to use voi instead of lei as formal pronoun. Every aspect of language, gesture, social interaction regulated. Creating fascist man required destroying all else. The resistance that emerged in 1943 came from survivors. Those who maintained networks underground. Those who refused, despite surveillance. Those who accepted social death rather than fascist life. Women and men who spent years in Confino organizing. Communist Party members who reconstituted cells despite arrests. Socialist workers who maintained solidarity despite unions destroyed. Liberal intellectuals who kept writing despite press control. Partisans who fought 1943 to 1945 came from schools of resistance taught in exile islands and underground cells. When Mussolini's body hung in Piazzale Loreto, April 29, 1945, crowd included survivors, families of murdered oppositionists, former prisoners, former exiles, people who spent decades under surveillance, people whose friends disappeared, whose family members died in Confino, whose careers ended with tribunal conviction, whose lives marked permanently by regime's repression. They spat on corpse, beat it, urinated on it. Not just vengeance, expression of decades of repressed rage, of humiliation returned, of terror transformed to triumphant violence. Piazzale Loreto became symbol because it reversed power dynamic. Bodies of 15 partisans displayed there August 1944 by Germans and fascists as warning. Now 18 fascist bodies displayed same spot. Law of eye for eye. Ending matching beginning. Violence's final accounting, but accounting incomplete. Continuity of state apparatus meant many fascist officials remained in positions. Judges who sentenced thousands kept robes. Police who arrested opponents kept badges. Bureaucrats who maintained surveillance files kept desks. Purge failed. Transitional justice incomplete. Why? Desire for administrative continuity. Fear of chaos. Practical need for experienced personnel. Anti-communist priorities of post-war government. United States and Britain preferred stable Italy, even with fascist bureaucrats, over unstable Italy with communist influence. Cold War calculations trumped justice. Partisans prosecuted in post-war trials, while fascist collaborators walked free. Papers of Terracini and Basso document this. Umberto Terracini, one of Gramsci's Turin colleagues. Lelio Basso, socialist intellectual. Both documented judiciary repression continuing after liberation. Show trials of partisans. Anti-communist bias in courts. Failure to purge fascist judges. Continuity, not rupture. This means Mussolini's system outlived him. Not whole system, not open fascism, but mechanisms. Surveillance files, administrative procedures, police powers, anti-communist ideology. These continued, adapted to democracy, used against same targets, communists, socialists, activists, different regime, same techniques. Illustrates durability of authoritarian methods once established. Once bureaucracy built to track 130,000 people develops, doesn't disappear overnight. Once informant networks cultivated, don't dissolve. Once social stigma attached to opposition persists. System's ghost haunted Italian politics for decades. The spatial analysis of arrests showed something else. Patterns visible only with GIS mapping of 2,400 individuals arrested 1925 to 1927. Followed through tribunal system to 1928. Data from Rome's Central State Archives, National Association of Politically Persecuted Italian Anti-Fascists, National Institute of Statistics, cross-checking Ministry of Justice records, Ministry of Defense documents, Political Police Register, ANPPIA files. Result, database with names, gender, birth dates, professions, addresses, arrest dates, locations, reasons, pre-investigation dispositions, court dispositions, detention periods, detention locations, surveillance periods. This data allowed Knox index analysis showing spatio-temporal proximity patterns, hotspot analysis identifying geographic clusters, mapping revealing sophisticated system of territorial and population control, not random terror, calculated repression, different strategies for different regions, mass operations in industrial centers, steady pressure in rural areas, heightened surveillance in borderlands, targeting of specific occupations, industrial workers, specific ages, young adults, specific political affiliations, communists first, then socialists, then anarchists, then liberals, gender differentiation, arrest men at higher rates but punish women equally when arrested. The pattern reveals regime understood its opponents, knew where they concentrated, knew which groups most dangerous, knew how to isolate them, knew how to prevent coalitions, knew how to make examples without creating martyrs. This sophistication distinguishes Italian fascism from cruder repressions, not random violence, bureaucratic violence, not mob rule, authoritarian legalism, not chaos, system. Special Tribunal provided legal facade. Overa provided intelligence. Confino provided punishment without international outcry. Castor oil provided humiliation without death. Each mechanism calculated, each adapted to circumstances, each refined through experience. The evidence comes from archives. Tribunal records preserved, Overa files maintained, prison ledgers kept, Confino documentation filed, names, dates, locations, charges, sentences, all recorded, all preserved. Mussolini's regime bureaucratized its repression. This means we can reconstruct it, can map it, can analyze it, can understand mechanisms, can see patterns, can count victims, can name dead, can trace survivors. This documentation distinguishes Italian fascism's repression from some other authoritarian regimes. We know what happened. We know who suffered. We know how system operated. No mystery, just evil cataloged. The prosecutor's words at Gramsci's trial remain most chilling summary. For 20 years, we must stop this brain from functioning. Acknowledgement that regime feared ideas more than guns, that intellectual opposition threatened more than armed resistance, that Gramsci's mind represented greater danger than Communist Party's organization. So they stopped it, slowly, legally, through tribunal sentence and prison conditions, watching him deteriorate, documenting his decline, all while maintaining legal fiction of justice, all while claiming rule of law, all while insisting regime respected rights. This hypocrisy defined system. Castor oil wasn't torture, public health measure, exile wasn't punishment, administrative relocation, surveillance wasn't repression, public safety monitoring, special tribunal wasn't political court, defensive state institution, every mechanism justified, every violence legitimized, every abuse normalized, until opposition became impossible, until silence became survival, until fascism became only option. That's how Mussolini judged communists, not through honest courts, not through fair trials, not through proportionate punishment, through systematic destruction of opposition as social possibility, through making dissent mark of shame, through isolating resistors from communities, through bureaucratizing terror so thoroughly it became invisible, through building system where every Italian participated in surveillance either as watcher or watched, through creating state where thinking became dangerous, where speaking became foolish, where organizing became suicidal, where the only rational choice was silence and performance of loyalty. The archives at Rome's Central State contain the receipts. 21,000 processed in 1926. 2,400 arrested 1925 to 1927 followed through system. 30,000 total processed by special tribunal over 16 years. 130,000 with Overa files. 940 monitored after release from 2,400 sample. Names preserved. Dates recorded. Mechanisms documented. This happened. Not propaganda. Not exaggeration. Fascist Italy's own records prove it. Mussolini's regime documented its repression meticulously. Now those documents expose it completely. The final irony lies on Ventotene. Island Bocchini, selected in November 1926 for political exile, barely inhabited volcanic rock in Tyrrhenian Sea. prisoners sent there to be forgotten. Instead, they wrote manifesto that helped found European Union. Spinelli and Rossi used isolation regime imposed to develop ideas that prevented future Mussolinis, used experience of nationalist authoritarianism to argue for transnational democracy, used memory of fascist violence to design institutions preventing its recurrence. Island, meant to destroy opposition, became birthplace of anti-fascist European project. Perfect inversion. Regime's greatest success, crushing opposition through exile, contained seed of its greatest failure, creating conditions for opposition's intellectual triumph. That's the receipts. That's the documented history of how Mussolini judged communists, not in courtrooms, in concrete cells on volcanic islands, in castor oil torture in town squares, in surveillance files on 130,000 people, in prosecutors' declaration that brains must stop functioning, in Gramsci's deterioration documented in letters, in 16, women exiled for offending state, in 2000, killed for thinking differently, all preserved in archives, all proven, all real.